Peter Pan has long been hailed as the hero of his own story, but what if I told you that he's not actually the whimsical, innocent boy we all thought he was? And that we may be completely misguided about Captain Hook. Alright, I'm gonna have to give you some context for all those baseless accusations, so let's rewind real quick. First of all, this theory I'm about to explore may well ruin your childhood forever. Sorry about that. But on the other hand, what I'm about to tell you may also blow your mind, so I guess it evens out. The theory claims that Peter Pan is not necessarily going around helping children reconnect with their whimsical childish sides, but is killing the Lost Boys to prevent them from growing up. In this theory, Captain Hook is one of a few who survived his murderous efforts and is now out to save others from meeting the same grim fate. I know, it's a lot to take in when you hear it for the first time, but given that Disney did such a good job sanitizing the old Grimm Brothers fairy tales, I think this is worth exploring a little more. Let's dig into it. So in basically every version of the Peter Pan story, we get the same basic setup. Peter Pan is a mischievous young boy who can fly and who never ever grows up. He leads a group known as the Lost Boys who, according to the original play, fall out of their prams when the nurse is looking the other way, and if they are not claimed in 7 days, they are sent far away to the Neverland. Neverland, of course, is Peter Pan's playground, a faraway place where fun reigns supreme. Now, there are some strange things going on in the story. Sure, Peter Pan does kind of go around breaking into people's houses, recruiting children to come and live with him on an island where there are no limits. On paper, it sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen, but it's a story, so it's not really fine, but it is what it is. Anyway, we know that one of the big things about Neverland is that Peter Pan refuses to ever grow up. Time here is a strange and ambiguous thing, as some residents of Neverland never grow up, much like Peter Pan, but many others, including the Lost Boys, do grow up. Peter can do many things, but he cannot fight time. Now, in this theory, Peter handles that the only way he seems to know. He kills them. Because to him, a boy who refuses to grow up, life is not worth living unless you're a child, which leads me to the complication of Captain James Hook. In this theory, Captain Hook and the other pirates would not be considered the villain per se. These are people who survived Peter Pan's initial attacks, his murder sprees, and his efforts to fend off the ravages of time. They somehow managed to grow up and flee Neverland before Peter could turn his attacks in their direction. Now they dedicate their lives to protecting the children who could potentially find themselves at the end of Peter's dagger. Look, it's dramatic and kind of silly, and I initially thought it made no sense. Hook is portrayed in basically every incarnation of the story as a villain, and in the novel, he's even described as being a figure so intimidating that notorious pirates like Blackbeard and Long John Silver are afraid of him. But when I went researching for this theory, I found something that changed my mind. Because J.M. Barrie kind of confirmed the theory in the 1911 book, Peter and Wendy. In Chapter 5, Barrie writes, "The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on. And when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. But at this time, there were 6 of them, counting the twins as 2. Well, I think that changes everything. Look, the wording of it is open to interpretation. Peter thins them out doesn't have to necessarily mean that he kills them. It could also mean that he simply exiles them from Neverland when they grow up. But writers use the words they use for a reason, and he could easily have clarified that if he wanted to. The ambiguity is asking readers to jump to their own conclusions, and maybe Pan is a murderer. After all, there's been a theory for years now that Neverland is actually not a fantastical land of joy and fun, but a kind of afterlife for children who died when they were young. The Lost Boys, in this theory, are a collection of ghosts and spirits, or whatever else you want to deem them, who are given a second chance at the childhood they were cruelly denied in life. Now, in this interpretation, Peter is obviously a really good guy. That's a great thing to do for them. And it makes sense, since it's long been speculated that Barrie wrote the initial Peter Pan story following the accidental death of his brother in childhood. Barrie's mother handled the death poorly, but it was said that she took comfort in the idea that he would remain a boy forever. So it's not impossible that Barrie had this in mind while writing Neverland, subconsciously creating a land where children taken from the world too soon could have a second chance at the childhood they never got. Let me get back to the Peter and Wendy novel for a moment. The book quite clearly lays this out in the very first chapter, in which Mrs. Darling recalls Peter Pan. After thinking back into her childhood, she just remembered a Peter Pan who was said to live with the fairies. There were odd stories about him, as that when children died, he went part of the way with them, so that they should not be frightened. Every incarnation of Peter Pan implies this in some form or another, whether clearly or very subtly. However, there's always some way to interpret that Peter exists to help guide dead children through the uncertainty of the afterlife. They have an adventure in Neverland, and then they get killed and moved on to the next plane of existence, which, unless I'm very wrong, is heaven. So yes, Peter Pan is in some way doing a good thing, and we should celebrate him for that. But then we have to come back to the whole point of this video, which is Peter Pan is killing kids. Regardless of his intentions, when those kids grow up, he cannot allow them to go through with it. Let's look at another example of Peter's questionable intentions. At the beginning of the story, Peter sneaks into Wendy Darling's home for the very first time. He encourages Wendy and her crew to embrace the idea of adventure and do something fun and to fly. And how do they do that? Well, they have to jump out the window. Now let's be very clear on something. If this was anyone other than Peter Pan, Disney would not have made a movie about it. Encouraging kids to fly is not role model behavior. But anyway, if Peter is this kind of mythical guide figure who helps children find their way through the afterlife, this is a really unfair way to cheat the system, because he's basically willingly killing the kids that he will then guide on their adventure. I mean, it's kind of psychotic, and definitely puts a bit of a shadow on his good guy reputation. So, let's do a bit of a recap before we go any further. We have some credible reasons to believe that Peter Pan is a psychotic spirit guide picking kids at random, convincing them to die, and then applauding himself for helping them have an adventure, after which he will kill them and send them to heaven. Sounds pretty crazy, right? But how does Captain Hook factor into this? Well, if we continue down the route of treating him and the pirates as survivors of Peter Pan, it means they somehow managed to escape Neverland. And I think it would make sense that the reason they escape in the first place is because they see that Peter is ritualistically murdering all of his followers like some twisted youth cult. So, Captain Hook and his allies will inevitably see Peter Pan as a child murderer and nothing more. They don't believe he's helping the kids or doing a good thing or pretty much any of the propaganda that Peter could offer. They just see him as a straight-up killer. He's trying to build some twisted youth-centric utopia, killing anyone who dares to make it past 10 years old. This makes a
You
lot
think they're just cartoons, bright colors, silly jokes, harmless adventures. But what if that's only the surface? What if something darker is hiding behind the laughter? Abandoned cities beneath the ocean, where the sky isn't made of clouds at all. Radiation that created strange beings who believe they're normal. Families living in a world that already ended, pretending everything is fine. Every episode isn't just a story, it's a clue, a trace of catastrophe, a world after the apocalypse, carefully disguised as childhood nostalgia. The signs were always there, in the background, in the silence, in the details no one questioned. Are you ready to see what was hidden in plain sight? Welcome to the theories that change your childhood forever. Subscribe if you're ready to see the truth.
A lot of sense, and I could easily see this being the reason that Hook and Peter end up in this eternal battle. Both of them have their own intentions for the Lost Boys, and they have their own ideas of how the situation should be handled. It's why Captain Hook tries so hard to get the kids to become pirates, not Lost Boys. They actually stand a chance of survival here. But Hook doesn't understand that Peter is helping the kids move on to heaven, to their next journey. Admittedly, he's also seemingly killing the kids to get them on the journey in the first place, but you know. The point is that Hook, throughout the incarnations, and especially in the Disney movie, just won't listen to anybody. He's a pompous, egotistical man, so why would he listen to a kid who kills other kids? There's no room for discussion or debate, just endless sword fights and pirate ship attacks in the happiest place maybe on Earth. Now, there is a little snag in the theory when it comes to Captain Hook. The original play implies that Hook attended Eton College, which accepts students from the age of 13. Therefore, it's likely he would never have gotten to Neverland before he became a teenager, at which point he would be too old for Peter to even consider a lost boy. It's not common to hear about people who have gone through unthinkable traumas and then dedicate their lives to helping other victims find their strength and build their path back to their own lives. I think that's what this theory does with Captain Hook. This is a guy who was clearly so traumatized by his experience at Neverland that he became an intimidating pirate just so he could develop a reputation and come back to save others from meeting the same fate. Honestly, it kind of turns him into a more complicated character, something way more interesting than this pompous guy who really doesn't like the color of his own blood, which honestly was always a strange thing considering he wears red all the time. The great thing about the Peter Pan story has always been its versatility. You can tell it in any medium or genre with as many different interpretations as you want, and it holds up pretty well. But the idea of the story following Peter Pan as this complex helper/murderer is especially interesting and really changes the dynamic of the story. I mean, in all incarnations, Peter has always been a little cruel and unintentionally selfish. He thinks everything is a game, and he doesn't seem that invested in whether the Lost Boys live or die, for one thing. So it's not a massive stretch to think he could kill. But expanding it out into a theory that sees him willingly killing kids just to guide them to heaven is a whole other thing. It turns the story into a kind of horror tale. Now, Disney would never sanction this kind of thing, and I'm pretty sure that they went to great lengths to try and prevent these kinds of implications from being included in the cartoon. But the story is so rooted in ambiguity that I think you could argue that the same thing is happening there. Peter Pan is just a very charming psycho. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Captain Hook is a good person in these stories by any means. He pretty obviously isn't. But I think it would be understandable that if he did survive the terror of Peter Pan, he would become a kind of vigilante to protect others from meeting the same fate. So, yeah, the Peter Pan story is all about Peter's efforts to prevent the Lost Boys from growing up by any means necessary, including death. Well, exclusively death. Or maybe this whole story is just about a magical flying boy who likes fighting with an upper-class British pirate just for the hell of it. I don't know, man. I just like cartoons.